Do modal verbs confuse you? Are you not sure of how to use and when to use them? In this lesson, you will be amazed of how often you use modal verbs in sentences. It is important that you are able to use them properly to express various intentions. So let's get started. What are modal verbs? Modal verbs are types of auxiliary verbs used to express ability, possibility, permission, prohibition, and obligation. But we will focus only on these three modal verbs, which are the modal verbs of obligation, permission, and prohibition. So, what are modals of obligation? Well, you got to do what you got to do. When we talk about obligation in English, we can use must, have to, and should. We use have to and must to express strong obligation. However, there is a slight difference between the way we use them. The modal verb must is used to express a strong obligation or necessity that comes from the speaker. For example, I am late, I must hurry now. Take note that the urgency to do something comes from the speaker himself. Here's another example. You must submit your homework today. Another modal verb is the modal verb have to. Have to shows that the obligation comes from outside the speaker. It can be an existing rule or law. For example, you always have to wear your ID in school. Ali has to work tomorrow, so he can't come. We have to check everyone's ID. So in these examples, it seems like you have to do something in order not to violate a rule or law. So don't get angry when the security guard asks for your ID, since it is not his obligation, or the obligation does not come from him, but it is already an existing rule. Alright? Next, take note that we don't use must to express obligation in the past. Instead, we use had to. For example, I had to pay 1,000 pesos to renew my passport last week. So you cannot say must in here since the action is already done. Here's another modal verb of obligation, the modal verb should. Should is a bit weaker obligation, but still an obligation. We use this to give advice or telling people what you think is a good idea. For example, you should study hard so you can pass the exam. Or you can say, you should see a doctor. Or maybe you should go for a coffee or lunch and see how you feel. Here, the obligation is somehow not that strong, since you may or may not do the obligation for yourself. Since it's likely an advice or you're just suggesting. So maybe sometime you should listen to a friend. That might be a help. Alright, so again, what are the modal verbs of obligation? So we have must, should, and have to. Now let's go to the next. Modal verbs of permission. Modal verbs of permission are the verbs that we can use to give and ask for permission. And the modal verbs of permission are can, could, and may. So you might hear someone says, could I borrow your pen? Can I borrow your pen? Or may I borrow your pen? This may sound similar and the meaning may sound the same. However, they could be used in various situations. What do I mean? We often use can to ask for and give permission. For example, can I sit here? Yes, you can. Can I make suggestion? Sure you can. Can I leave early? No, you can't. Permission. Another modal verb of permission is the modal verb could. We also use could to ask for permission, but not to give it. Could is more formal and more polite than can. So if you want to sound a bit polite, then you should use the modal verb could. For example, could I ask you something? Could I have some more juice? Could I bring a friend to the party? Now take note that if somebody asked you permission using the modal verb could, take note that you can answer, yes you could, but your answer still in the form of yes you can or no you can't. Another modal verb of permission is the modal verb could. We can also use could to say that someone was allowed to do something in the past. We may use could not or couldn't to say that they are not allowed to do it. So for example, we could go to any shop in the mall we wanted to. Both staff and students could use the ice rink. We couldn't study in the library after 6 p.m. So take note that the word could here gives you the idea that they're allowed to do something in the past and until now. Now here's another modal verb of permission, the modal verb may. May is the most formal way to ask for and give permission. We mostly use may for a more formal situation, and may not if used to say that someone is not allowed to do something. For example, may I see your passport please? Or may I use your calculator on the test? May I have another piece of cake? You may go as soon as you have finished your exam. I'm sorry, but you may not enter the premises. Take note that all of these sentences uses the modal verb may. And take note that when you are listening to someone asking permission, he is likely seeing you as a person in authority. Alright, so let's do a wrap up. So when you ask permission, you can either use the modal verbs can, could, and may. If you want to be less formal and more direct, you can use can. When you want to be more polite and wanting to show respect, you can use the modal verb could. And if you want to ask permission for somebody in a more formal situation, then you can use the modal verb may. Alright, you got it there so far? Now let's go to the next modal verb, which is the modal verb of prohibition. And you cannot do anything beyond. Okay. Alright, so modal verbs of prohibition are pretty much simple. These modal verbs for prohibition are used when we want to say that something is not allowed or permitted. The modal verbs used are may and can. Then they are used as negatives, like can't or cannot, must not, may not, and should not. We use can to talk about something that is against the rule, particularly when we didn't make the rules. For example, what does this sign say? Oh, we can't park here. Or you can't take photos at the museum. They're strictly prohibited. Or you can say, sorry, we can't sell knives under 18 years old. Take note that the prohibition comes from a certain rule. Next, prohibition using the modal verb may not. May not is the formal way to prohibit something. So for example, you may not smoke in this house. You may not wear shoes in the office. You may not eat in the conference room. So take note that in this situation is a bit more formal. Another modal verbs of prohibition is must not. It is used when talking about things that are not allowed. They are prohibited and forbidden due to either real laws, regulations, and personal obligations. So it's quite a bit stronger prohibition. So, for example, you must not use a cell phone. You must not write with pencil. You must not play with music. Like you must not use cell phone when you are taking a test. And you must not write with pencil when you are writing government forms. Alright, so that's it for the 3 modal verbs, which are the modal verbs of permission, prohibition, and obligation. Let's see how you get these simple tips by answering the next part of the activity. Thank you very much and see you soon.